Hello everybody, this is Jacob with Mortgage Coach Support. This video is to show you how to enter a HELOC that is tied to Prime, but we're talking about an existing HELOC. This is not going to be a new one. There'll actually be a separate video that shows you how to do a new HELOC tied to Prime, but generally it's about the same. So let me show you how to do it. So I'm actually in the assumptions area right now inside Edge, and I'm going to finish up the first product, and at the end of it, it asks, does it have a second lien? So I choose yes on that. I'm going to hit the right arrow. Now this is where we're going to enter our second lien information. So we have to make some assumptions on this loan. So you'll need to collect a little bit of data from your borrower if you can possibly get it. So for this case, I'm going to say that the borrower has told me they took out this HELOC 2 years ago, and they have a $45,000 current loan balance on it. So I will specify 2 years from today's date. Go back to 6/1 of 2011. Now, very important for HELOCs, because it's an interest-only loan for the entire term, you're going to use the actual current draw amount. You're not going to use the original balance or the max draw. So if they told me that they've actually taken 45 out on it, we're going to use 45 for both of these. Oops. All right. So the next part here is I need to make sure and put an interest rate in there. Let's say they took it out at 5%. Now the term, not terribly important on a HELOC. Some of them do have terms, some of them don't. Generally I like to assume 300 months here, and let's put that in. Now you'll notice when I did that, Edge doesn't know it's interest only yet, so it automatically adjusted the remaining balances if they were making P&I payments. Now that's not the case, so we're going to overwrite it in just a moment. But we do need to make sure and tell Edge that this is an IO loan for the entire life of the loan. So I'm going to put 300 months in here as well. And we don't need a balloon month on this, because technically once the term expires, it's going to call for the remaining balance as a lump sum anyway. So that technically is a balloon payment. We don't have to be concerned with that part. But I do need to go back in and overwrite my balance. Now if I want to keep this as a fixed loan, I don't want to schedule any adjustments going forward. I'm just going to assume that this HELOC is going to hover around 5% for the rest of the life of the loan. I'm going to leave it as fixed. But if I do want to tie this to Prime and I want to show some future adjustment possibilities, I'm going to choose ARM. And once you do that, the ARM Details button pops up. You can click on that. And this is where we get into the nuts and bolts of what your adjustable rate mortgage is going to do over time. So first and foremost, we're going to select Prime as our index. That's at the very bottom of the list. And since my borrower told me they have a 5% rate right now, I know that their margin has to be 1.75, because that'll give me a total rate of 5%. So I'm going to put my 1.75 in there. Now if there was a floor rate, you'd want to enter that. Oftentimes you won't have a floor rate on a HELOC, but let's say it can't go below 3%. Now the top area, these are the critical components. So what you're doing here is you're telling Edge how you want this to adjust in the future. So let's say that I want to make it adjust out 1/8 of a percent every 6 months going down the line until it hits a life cap. So I'm going to make sure that both my first adjustment cap and my periodic caps are both 1/8. So I'm going to put 0.125, 0.125. Now my max rate here, let's say that I don't want to project this going past about 10%, so I'm going to leave it at 10% for my max rate. That means Edge will not increase that rate over 10. Same thing like the floor rate, won't go under 3, won't go over 10. Now the adjustment months, remember I said I wanted this to adjust 1/8 every 6 months. So I'm going to put my adjustment months in at 6 months. Now the most critical component of this entire thing is the first adjustment month. Now this first adjustment month is relative to the start date of the loan. So if I want this adjustment to happen in the future, because I'm not really concerning myself with past adjustments, I just want to show future adjustments, I need to make sure that since this loan is 24 months old, my first adjustment month has to be at least month 25. So that said, if I want this to adjust in 6 months from today's date, it's going to be month 30. So I'll put in 30 there, and that's 30 months from the start date originally, so that's 6 months from today's date. Now this will assume that every 6 months it's going to adjust up 1/8 until it hits a 10%. Then it's going to stop adjusting and just remain at 10% for the life of the loan. Now that happens because I'm choosing a worst case scenario. If you want to choose a best case scenario, you can. Best case scenario assumes that as soon as that first adjustment month comes up, and in this case it's just the next adjustment you're specifying, it's going to go to index plus margin and stay there for the life of the loan. That turns out to be 5%, which is in fact our start rate. So if you're going to do that, you might as well make it a fixed loan and avoid all this data entry, because you don't need it. It's not going to adjust at that point. So I wouldn't recommend choosing best case for these. Now you can also customize it. Now when you choose custom, see, I had initially chosen worst case, so you can see that I'm getting that 8th adjustment going up, 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 all the way until it hits a 10% cap. Once it hits 10, it doesn't adjust anymore. Even though there's actually still quite a few months left on the term, it's not going to adjust any further. Now you don't have to set static adjustments like I've done. If you want to, you can customize these. Let's say at month 35, I actually want it to go down a quarter of a point, so I'm going to do minus 0.25. And you can see what it does to the rate on the right. You can keep doing these ups and downs as long as you want. And you can specify how you think the market is going to perform over the course of time. Again, completely subjective. You can predict anything you'd like here. Just make sure that when you present this to your client, you let them know what kind of scenario you're showing them. You know, if you produce this and you don't let them know that, hey, I'm looking at a life cap in about 10 years, they're not going to know what numbers you're using to figure this out. So we want to make sure and be very intentional about declaring what you're doing with these adjustments. If it's a worst case scenario, that's really easy, because then all you have to do is tell them, hey, I'm showing it adjusting every 6 months up an eighth until it hits 10%. It's going to stay there. But if you're customizing, you definitely do want to clue them in as to what you're doing, and really customization is a good thing, because you're portraying your advice and your experience in the market. You've seen what Prime has done over time, so you've made a prediction based on what you think it's going to do in the future. That's perfectly acceptable. Just make sure to tell your borrower. Alright, so that's about it for an existing HELOC tied to Prime. If you have any questions on this, please do let us know over here in support, and we'd be happy to help you. Thanks. Bye-bye.